There is a woman sitting in her kitchen right now, and I can describe her morning with almost unsettling precision because I have seen her walk into my practice hundreds of times. She wakes before the sun, pulled from sleep by a wave of heat that starts deep in her chest and radiates outward until her pillowcase is damp and her heart is racing. She throws off the covers, waits for the flush to pass, and then she does the one thing that feels like self-care in the chaos of what her body has become. She walks to the kitchen, fills the coffee maker, and while the dark liquid pools into the carafe, she reaches for the little yellow packet, or the blue one, or the green one, tears it open, and stirs it into her cup. Sugar-free, 0 calories. She has been told this is the smart choice, the disciplined choice. She takes that first sip on an empty stomach, and for a brief moment, she feels like herself again. But here is what nobody has told her. That cup of sugar-free coffee is not doing what she thinks it is doing. It may be quietly, invisibly making every single one of her menopause symptoms worse. I know that sounds dramatic, but stay with me because what I am about to explain is not speculation. It is biochemistry. It is the convergence of 3 physiological pathways: cortisol regulation, insulin signaling, and a part of your gut microbiome you have probably never heard of, that all collide in that single morning cup. And when you understand how they connect, you will never look at your coffee the same way again. Let us start with what happens the moment your feet touch the floor in the morning. Your body has an ancient, deeply programmed hormonal event called the Cortisol Awakening Response. And if you are a woman navigating perimenopause or menopause, this is one of the most important things you can understand about your own biology. Within 30 to 45 minutes of waking, your adrenal glands release a powerful surge of cortisol, your primary stress hormone. This is not a malfunction. This is by design. That cortisol surge is meant to bring you from the deep unconsciousness of sleep into alert, functional wakefulness. It raises your blood pressure slightly, mobilizes glucose for energy, sharpens your cognitive function. In a perfectly balanced body, this surge peaks, does its job, and then gracefully declines as the morning progresses, handing the hormonal stage over to other players. But here is where it becomes deeply relevant to women in menopause. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, is already under enormous strain. As your ovaries reduce their production of estrogen and progesterone, your adrenal glands pick up the slack, converting precursors like DHEA into smaller amounts of sex hormones. Your adrenals are already working overtime. And the cortisol awakening response during menopause is often exaggerated. The spike is higher, the decline is slower, and the entire pattern becomes erratic. Now, into this already volatile hormonal landscape, you pour a cup of black coffee on an empty stomach. And what caffeine does to cortisol is not subtle. Research has shown that caffeine can amplify cortisol production by as much as 30%, and this effect is most pronounced when cortisol is already elevated, which is exactly what is happening during your morning awakening response. You are taking a system that is already running hot, already overextended, and pouring accelerant on it. The cortisol spike goes higher, it stays elevated longer, and this creates a cascade that ripples through your entire hormonal ecosystem in ways that are profound and far-reaching. Here is one of those ripple effects that very few people discuss. There is a phenomenon called Pregnenolone Steal. Pregnenolone is a master precursor hormone. Your body uses it to manufacture both cortisol and progesterone. When cortisol demand is relentlessly high, it diverts pregnenolone away from progesterone production and funnels it toward making more cortisol. Your already declining progesterone levels drop even further. And progesterone is not just a reproductive hormone, it is your calming hormone, your sleep hormone, the hormone that balances estrogen. When progesterone plummets, estrogen goes unopposed, and this imbalance drives hot flashes, night sweats, anxiety, and that maddening inability to stay asleep past 2 a.m. And there is another connection here that is even more immediate, even more visceral. That exaggerated cortisol spike destabilizes your hypothalamic thermoregulatory center, the part of your brain that acts as your internal thermostat. During menopause, the thermoneutral zone, the range of temperatures your body considers comfortable, narrows dramatically. It can shrink to almost nothing. A cortisol surge narrows it even further, which means even the tiniest fluctuation in core body temperature can trigger a full-blown hot flash. That cup of coffee you drank to wake up, to feel normal, to reclaim some sense of control over your morning. It may have directly triggered the hot flash that hit you 45 minutes later in the shower. But this, as unsettling as it is only the first layer of the story. Let us talk about the sweetener, that little packet you tore open and stirred into your coffee. The one that says 0 calories, 0 sugar, no glycemic impact. Whether it contains aspartame, sucralose, acesulfame potassium, or even certain processed forms of stevia, there is something happening inside your body when you consume it that defies the very promise printed on the label. You see, your body has sweet taste receptors, and most people assume those receptors exist only on the tongue. But researchers have discovered that identical sweet taste receptors, called T1R2 and T1R3, line the walls of your small intestine, your stomach, and even your pancreas. These gut-based receptors do not just passively detect sweetness, they actively respond to it. When an artificial sweetener reaches these receptors, they send signals that trigger the release of insulin and incretin hormones like GLP-1, even though there is no actual glucose entering the bloodstream. Your body is mounting a full metabolic response to sugar that does not exist. This is what I call the Phantom Insulin Response, and for a woman in menopause, it is particularly dangerous. When insulin rises but there is no glucose to escort into cells, blood sugar actually drops. The result is reactive hypoglycemia, that sudden wave of fatigue, the brain fog at 10 in the morning, the desperate craving for something sweet by mid-afternoon. Chronically elevated insulin tells your body to store fat, particularly visceral fat, around the midsection. This visceral fat contains high concentrations of an enzyme called aromatase, which converts androgens into estrone, a weaker, more inflammatory form of estrogen that worsens menopausal symptoms. So the sweetener that was supposed to protect you from metabolic harm is actually triggering an insulin cascade that promotes the exact kind of fat storage that produces the exact kind of estrogen that makes menopause harder. The irony is almost cruel. I want to tell you about a woman named Diane, because her story illustrates this paradox with painful clarity. Diane was 52 when she first came to see me, a sharp, articulate project manager who ran complex corporate initiatives with precision and grace. But something had shifted in the preceding 18 months that she could not organize her way out of. She was having 8 to 10 hot flashes a day, the kind that left her blotting her forehead with tissues during video calls and changing her blouse at lunch. She had gained 15 pounds around her midsection despite counting every calorie with the same meticulous attention she gave her project timelines. Her brain fog had become so severe that she had forgotten 2 important client meetings in a single week, something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. And every afternoon around 3 o'clock, her energy crashed so hard that she would sit in her car in the office parking lot for 20 minutes, unable to muster the will to drive home. When I asked about her morning routine, she described it with pride. She woke at 5:30, made a large black coffee with 2 packets of sucralose, drank it on an empty stomach while checking emails, and did not eat breakfast until 9 or 10 because she believed intermittent fasting would help with the weight. Her second sugar-free coffee came at 10, and her third at 1 in the afternoon. She was consuming significant caffeine on an empty stomach paired with artificial sweeteners 3 times a day, and she genuinely believed this was the healthiest possible version of her coffee habit. When I explained the cortisol amplification, the Phantom Insulin Response, and the Pregnenolone Steal, when I drew the connections between her morning cup and her afternoon crashes, between her sucralose packets and her visceral weight gain, between her empty stomach caffeine and her relentless hot flashes, something shifted in her eyes. It was not shame. It was recognition. It was the look of a woman who finally had a framework that made sense of the chaos. We made changes that were not radical, but were strategic. Diane moved her first coffee to 8:30 after eating a breakfast of scrambled eggs with avocado and a handful of walnuts. She replaced sucralose with a dash of Ceylon cinnamon and a teaspoon of raw honey. Real sugar, yes, but a small amount that gave her body actual glucose to match the insulin response. And the cinnamon itself has been shown in research to improve insulin receptor sensitivity. She limited herself to 2 cups, both before noon, and she added a high-quality probiotic to her daily routine. 8 weeks later, Diane sat across from me and said the words that I never tire of hearing. Her hot flashes had dropped to 2 or 3 a day, manageable ones that passed quickly. She had lost 7 pounds without changing anything else about her diet. The brain fog had lifted enough that she felt sharp again, present again, like herself again, and the 3 o'clock crash had simply disappeared. If Diane's story sounds familiar, if you are recognizing pieces of your own morning in hers, I have put together a detailed resource in the description below that walks you through the exact morning routine adjustments that can support your hormones through this transition, because small strategic shifts can make a difference that feels anything but small. But I promised you there was a deeper layer to this story, and this is where it becomes truly fascinating and truly urgent, because the most significant damage that artificial sweeteners may be doing to your menopause hormones is not happening in your bloodstream. It is happening in the dark, warm, teeming ecosystem of your gut. Inside your intestines, trillions of bacteria influence everything from immunity to mood to weight. Within this microbial universe, there is a specific subset called the Estrobolome, gut bacteria capable of metabolizing estrogen. These bacteria produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, which determines how much estrogen your body recycles into circulation and how much it eliminates. When the estrobolome is healthy, this process is balanced, but when it is disrupted, the system becomes erratic. Estrogen may be excessively reabsorbed, leading to dominance, or excessively eliminated, deepening the deficiency that drives hot flashes, bone loss, and cognitive changes. And here is the revelation that connects everything. Artificial sweeteners, particularly sucralose and aspartame, have been shown to significantly disrupt the gut microbiome. Research has demonstrated that sucralose can reduce beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium by as much as 50%. These are keystone species, and many are critical components of the estrobolome. Every packet of sucralose you stir into your coffee is slowly dismantling the bacterial machinery your body depends on to regulate estrogen. Think about what this means for a menopausal woman. Her ovaries are already producing dramatically less estrogen. Her body is scrambling to maintain balance through adrenal production, fat tissue conversion, and crucially, estrogen recycling through the estrobolome. If she is drinking 3 or 4 cups of artificially sweetened coffee every day, she is systematically undermining one of the last remaining mechanisms her body has to maintain stable estrogen levels. This is why sugar-free does not mean hormone-safe. This is the connection that almost nobody is making, and it is the reason why so many women who are doing everything they have been told is right, cutting sugar, counting calories, choosing the zero-calorie option, are still struggling with symptoms that feel relentless and unexplainable. I want to tell you about Margaret, because her story makes this deeply personal. Margaret was 58, a retired teacher married to her college sweetheart with 3 grandchildren she adored. But in the 2 years since her last period, something had gone profoundly wrong. She was waking at 2 or 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat, unable to fall back asleep. Her joints ached with persistent soreness that came from nowhere, and she had developed anxiety that felt completely foreign. A woman who had calmly managed classrooms of 30 children for decades was now panicking in the grocery store. When I asked about her dietary habits, the picture that emerged was striking. Margaret drank 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day, starting at 6 in the morning, and every single cup contained 2 packets of aspartame. She had been using artificial sweeteners for 20 years, ever since a blood sugar scare in her late 30s. She considered aspartame essential to her health. When we ran a comprehensive stool analysis, the results were stark. Margaret's gut diversity was severely depleted. The populations of Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium species were dramatically below normal ranges, and several other beneficial bacterial families were virtually absent. Her gut looked like a garden after a long drought, sparse, struggling, unable to perform the lush metabolic work it was designed for. And when I explained the estrobolome to her, when I connected those depleted bacteria to her body's inability to properly recycle and regulate the dwindling estrogen her body still produced, Margaret put her hand over her mouth and whispered something I will never forget. She said, "I have been poisoning the one thing that was trying to help me." She had not been poisoning herself, of course, not intentionally, not knowingly. She had been following advice that was incomplete, recommendations that looked at calories and blood sugar in isolation without understanding the intricate web of connections between gut health, microbial metabolism, and hormonal regulation. But the recognition, the understanding, gave her something powerful. It gave her a clear, actionable path forward. Margaret's changes were gradual. Over 4 weeks, she reduced her coffee from 5 cups to 2, both consumed before 10. She replaced afternoon coffees with green tea, which contains L-theanine, an amino acid that promotes calm alertness without aggressive cortisol stimulation. She eliminated artificial sweeteners entirely, sweetening her coffee instead with coconut oil and a teaspoon of pure maple syrup. She began eating fermented foods daily, kimchi with lunch, kefir with dinner, and started a targeted probiotic with lactobacillus strains known to support estrogen metabolism. 12 weeks later, Margaret's transformation was remarkable. She was sleeping through the night 5 out of 7 nights. Her anxiety had diminished so dramatically that she described it as a volume knob turned down from 8 to 2. Her joint pain, connected through the gut inflammation pathway because a disrupted microbiome increases systemic inflammation that aggravates joint tissues, had improved significantly, and the heart palpitations were nearly gone. Not because of cardiac medication, but because she had restored a gut ecosystem that could properly metabolize estrogen and support the neurochemical balance that keeps the autonomic nervous system calm. So where does this leave you tomorrow morning? I want to be clear. This is not about giving up coffee. Coffee is rich in polyphenols and antioxidants with genuine metabolic benefits. The ritual itself has real psychological value. This is about shifting from a coffee habit that unknowingly works against your hormones to one that consciously supports them. The first change is timing. Delay your first cup until 90 minutes after waking. This allows your cortisol awakening response to peak and decline naturally. So caffeine meets a descending cortisol curve rather than an ascending one. Your morning hot flashes may soften within days. The second change is never drinking coffee on an empty stomach. Pair it with protein and healthy fat: eggs, avocado, nuts, full-fat yogurt. Protein slows caffeine absorption, blunting the cortisol spike. Fat prevents the reactive blood sugar dip. The third change is what you put into your coffee. Replace artificial sweeteners with small amounts of whole, natural options. A teaspoon of raw honey provides actual glucose to match the insulin response. Ceylon cinnamon adds sweetness while improving insulin receptor sensitivity. A splash of coconut milk adds medium-chain triglycerides that support brain function. These are not indulgences. They are strategic metabolic support. I have included a complete guide in the link below that covers these food pairings, timing strategies, and gentle alternatives in detail, with specific morning routine templates designed for women in perimenopause and menopause who want to keep their coffee while supporting their hormones through this transition. The fourth change addresses your gut directly. If you have been using artificial sweeteners regularly, your estrobolome needs rebuilding. Fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, miso can shift microbial diversity within weeks. Add prebiotic fibers from garlic, onions, and asparagus to feed beneficial bacteria. And consider swapping afternoon coffee for green tea. Its L-theanine promotes calm alertness without cortisol stimulation. I want to return to where we started. That woman stirring her sugar-free coffee in the early morning, believing she is making the right choice. She is not foolish. She is navigating an overwhelming landscape of conflicting information. The label says sugar-free, and that is technically true. But sugar-free does not mean hormone-safe. Calorie-free does not mean consequence-free. What I have shared with you today is meant to create clarity, the kind that transforms confusion into confidence. Diane found that clarity, and her mornings became something she looked forward to. Margaret found it, and she reclaimed the sleep and vitality she thought menopause had permanently stolen. And you can find it too, because the changes are simple and your body is astonishingly responsive when you stop working against it. If this connected dots you had not considered before, share it with a woman who is struggling with the same symptoms, standing in her own kitchen, stirring her own sugar-free coffee, and wondering why she still feels this way. Subscribe to this channel because this is the kind of honest, science-based conversation we have here every week, always in service of helping you feel like yourself again.